Hello and welcome. Thank you, Samantha, so much for doing this session for us. I'd like to introduce Samantha Bridger, who is an insurance specialist, particularly around professional indemnity insurance for the mediation industry, among others, I'm sure. I'm Director of Mediation Institute, and we refer people, new mediators and others that are looking for insurance through to Samantha's Business All Solutions Insurance, because we know that they'll actually take the time to work out what people need. Just a disclaimer, we don't get any kickbacks or benefits. This is not a paid endorsement. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
What I really hope to achieve in this is to let people know a little bit more about what professional indemnity insurance is, why they need it. It's mandatory for mediators to have it, unless they're covered by their employment protection or something like that. So that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. So professional indemnity insurance is there for professionals. So for your mediators, you've got it for your real estate agents, psychiatrists, all that sort of thing. So someone that's giving advice or a professional service. But what indemnity is, it's basically there to put something back the way it was. So for example, most of our professional indemnity claims are in relation to acts, errors or omissions. And the professional indemnity insurance kicks in to cover any financial loss that the other person may have.
Okay. So it's something that you actually do or maybe don't do that you should have because of professional obligations.
And the other thing to think of too is that professional indemnity insurance, it's there to defend you if you're in the right, but it's also there to pay out if you are in the wrong. When they're faced with a professional indemnity claim, if they freak out, they think that they want to settle, get it over and done with nice and quickly, but that's not always the best scenario and the best way to go forward, especially if you've actually done nothing wrong and the allegations don't have any merit behind them. So the professional indemnity insurance is there to go in and defend you and keep your reputation in good order.
Oh, that's excellent, because working as we do in the dispute resolution industry, sometimes we get people who are really high conflict and sue or take people to court or do whatever they can when they're not feeling happy.
Exactly. And our main thing is keeping your reputation in good order.
Yeah.
You know, if there is a claim and something has gone wrong, we don't want it to affect you in the long term going forward either.
Absolutely. So what are the sorts of claims that happen for mediators?
There's quite a few examples that I want to go through and some areas that there are the risks there for the mediators. So one of them is conflict of interest. Now, I know with our mediators, they need to declare if there's a conflict of interest with their clients, but quite often you don't really know how far back you need to go, and quite often you don't know if there is a conflict of interest there as well. So one of the examples of claims that we've had is there was a husband and wife going through a financial and child settlement, and they were doing their mediation. Now, the mediator had actually worked for the husband's company doing separate mediation for them with one of their clients. And that was 4 years prior to the mediation with the husband and the wife. Now, the mediator didn't remember, they had no recollection of it. It was 4 years ago, and they've done many mediations since then. Now, the wife wasn't happy with the outcome and eventually did sue the mediator for a breach of conflict of interest because they didn't disclose the prior relationship they had with the husband and his company.
So that was enough of a claim, yeah.
Luckily, the insurer went in and defended the mediator at the time, and it did get thrown out of the court. But at the same token, too, you've still got the defence costs involved in all that. So in that circumstance, the allegations were thrown out because there was no bias, there was no risk or concern that the mediation wasn't done correctly. But it's still the cost. Without the insurance, you'd be up for the defence costs.
Absolutely. So a few $100s in insurance saved potentially thousands.
Exactly. So, and in my 18 years in insurance, I haven't seen a defence claim under sort of 50,000. Really. Got a couple of thousands, we can get 20,000, 50,000 and more.
So it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
and that's if you didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. That's just there to defend you.
Absolutely.
So, and the good thing with our policies that we have for the mediators, we actually have a nil excess. So in the event of a claim, you're not also, forking out the money for the excess for the claim to come into force.
Okay, so that's pretty significant because sometimes excesses can be quite high.
Correct.
Okay, so what are some other examples?
Some other examples, one of the concerns is contractual promise. So when the mediator is first conducting the mediation with their clients, if they're promising them that they're going to have an outcome, that could turn into a breach, especially if they're saying to them, we can resolve this in mediation, when there's a high chance that may not be the case. And that raises a higher concern with, you can't really sit there and promise them an outcome as part of the mediation. Because if you're promising them an outcome and the outcome's not issued, then you've got a concern.
Yeah, okay, that's a really great point to raise, and it also potentially puts a pressure on the mediator to try and pressure people into an agreement, which could create bias issues and all of that. So settlement focus is a real problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a claim in the US in regards to a family who were disputing who takes over the property as part of the will. And they were doing the mediation for that. And the mediator basically didn't advise them that mediation was voluntary, for starters, but also advised them that they could make a resolution, they could resolve this in the mediation. And the mediation actually went into the early hours of the morning, and both parties felt pressured to come to a resolution. It was turned out to come sometime after that. Both parties actually sued the mediator because both of them weren't happy with the outcome. So it wasn't just the one party, it was both parties that weren't happy because they felt forced into the outcome.
Oh, okay. And that mediator was just like, I'm going to keep them here till they reach an agreement. Very unethical, very inappropriate.
Very, especially when it goes into the early hours of the morning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
okay, and so that was one where there was a payout, was there? Or?
There was a payout for that one, yeah. The defence costs for that were, well, the court costs were about $100,000. There was a settlement amount reached that wasn't disclosed in the research that we found, though.
Okay. No,
so, but they did come to a settlement amount.
That's fine, but just the court costs enough.
Yeah. And that's the thing with the mediators I speak to, we talk about the deed of agreement, and I don't think there's enough weight given as to how much that is there to protect the mediators. So yeah, there are certain things that you need to make sure that you're including in your deed of agreement that you're signing with the clients, and that you need to specify that it's voluntary.
Yeah,
you know, that's one of the biggest things that you need to stress to them, and that you're not there to give advice. So, because without stressing that it's voluntary, you can have your clients assume that they've got no other choice but to mediate. And as we know, mediation doesn't work for everyone.
No.
There are parties out there that just have no want to mediate and want to end up in the courts.
Yeah. Absolutely, and they'll go through the motions, but they're not going to agree. Yeah, so that's really important, and I think we've talked before about how important it is to actually go through the agreement to mediate with people, not just here, sign this.
Yeah, you can't expect them to read and understand it as well. Quite often they're written in a legal way, and for a layman person, it's not easy for them to understand. So you need to be going through it point by point and making sure that your client understands all aspects. So especially when we have some clients that English is not their first language as well.
Absolutely. And it is part of our process. It's expected that's going to be the first thing that we do to make sure people understand. So don't cut corners, guys. And if you do that all the time, that's your process. If someone comes back and says, oh, I didn't know, you've signed it. You've also, my process is to go through. So that's really important. One of the things, the other real issues for mediators, we touched on conflict of interest before, but actually having to specify it if there's potentially something but everyone agrees to proceed. So you can't just do a general waiver of your agreement. Any conflict of interest is waived. No.
In your deed of agreement, when you're going through with the client, I'd be actually specifying what the conflict of interest is and that both parties have agreed. The more detail you can put down to cover your bum, really, the better.
Absolutely. So that people can't claim later, oh, I didn't know, it wasn't discussed or anything like that. If you've got it actually written in that there was a previous commercial relationship, but everyone agrees that it's fine to proceed or whatever. Of course, there are some conflicts of interest that we can't proceed. If you're a lawyer mediator and you were advising related to this, to their separation or their issue or whatever, you can't go on and be the mediator. It's just, you can't actually get agreement out of every conflict of interest. So it's got to still be within ethical.
Exactly. And one of the other things in the deed of agreement that you need to specify is that you're not there to give advice. Now, when it comes to advice, for some of the mediators, there's two different types. You've got your legal advice. I know some of our mediators wear two hats, and they're a lawyer or solicitor and a mediator at the same time. And they need to specify to their clients that they're not there for the legal side of things. They're wearing their mediator hat and they're not wearing their solicitor or lawyer hat at the time. If the client does have any concerns regarding legal advice, whether it's on the topic of the mediation or a separate topic, you need to be guiding them to go and seek their legal advice completely separately and not part of the mediation.
That's really important because some of our guidance is ambiguous. It says you can't give legal advice unless you're a lawyer, but
Yep.
as a lawyer, ethically, you can't give
legal
advice to people who've got conflicting interests. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
and if they're in a dispute, they're going to have to conflicting interests. It's just not safe to do.
Another thing too, like when it comes to general advice, if you're indicating to your clients how court will play out and giving them the hypothetical of, I think it will go this way, that's still a form of advice. And if the client then turns around and thinks to themselves, I'll stick with the mediation because I don't want that outcome in court, and turns out that's not the outcome and they feel penalised because they've agreed to something in mediation, that's another breach that can fall on you by giving them a hypothetical.
Absolutely. So if you're implying that there's a narrow range of outcomes, or the court will never agree to that, so just drop it, don't even put that proposal, then you may find that. And
it all depends on how it sways the client's mind. And it doesn't have to be advice. They could be, interpreting it as advice, even though it's not. So, and that's where the professional indemnity insurance would come to kick in to defend you when you're right.
Okay. So have you got any examples of that sort of thing?
Yes, there's one that I've got in regards to mandatory reporting. So there was a mediation that was going on in the US between husband and wife. Now, there weren't any concerns raised in the mediation for safety. However, after the mediation, it then went to court. The father actually assaulted the children, and the mother sued the mediator that there should have been a mandatory reporter and they should have reported it. Based on the notes from the mediator, it was clear that there was no concerns for the children's safety during the mediation, and that wasn't brought up by the mother and it wasn't brought up by the father. So in that circumstance, the insurer and the legal team went in to defend the mediator to basically say, there was no concerns. The defence costs for that one were about $50,000, and at the same token too, they're going in to keep the reputation of the mediator in good tact as well. That one was thrown out of court with no settlement because the same mediator has done nothing wrong. There was no concerns brought up in the mediation to warrant them to report something.
That brings up an important point as well about notes. There's some various thoughts about notes in our industry, and sometimes people, particularly lawyers that are used to having to keep everything forever, and they say, as a mediator, I don't have to keep anything.
I'm a hoarder. I'm a hoarder of my notes.
We should be definitely keeping our agreement to mediate, any information about waiver. You could keep everything, but definitely if there's been anything untoward, there's been a report, anything, you really have to keep a file note, and you have to keep it for a good amount of time.
I recommend following the financial guidelines and sticking with the 7 years for your notes and keeping them, because at the end of the day, something can appear, you can be dragged into a legal case within between 5 and 7 years, depending on the state. So if you go on the worst case scenario of the 7 years, you're covering all bases. But the main thing is you trust your gut. If you're in a mediation and something's not sitting right with you, record it in the note. The more notes that you're keeping, the better you're covering your bum.
Yeah, excellent. That's really good advice. I think everyone should be thinking about that. Professional practice, we've got the risk that people can come back later with a different perspective, and they might have been all praise at the time, but something happens and then they think, someone's to blame. It must be that mediator.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Whilst we don't have as many professional indemnity claims in Australia as we do in the US and the UK, we are turning into a claims-based state like the US. We're seeing the change, we're seeing the shift in our claims history and our claims data across Australia, and we're turning into more of a sue-all state.
Absolutely. Which brings me on to the types of insurance people can get. I'm aware that in our industry, there are some pool policies. Or
the policy that we offer for our mediators meets the accreditation requirements. So it's the $1 million cover for professional indemnity insurance with a nil excess. And then that meets the requirements for their mediation. Yeah. There are policies out there that are what we refer to as group policies or pool policies. And what it means is that you've got a sum insured of, say, $5 million worth of cover, but you're one of many members on that one policy. So it's a shared limit. And the concern is if you had one claim for 3 million, one claim for 2 million, that's the 5 million that's exhausted. There's none left over for the rest of the members. And the problem that you have is that you don't know what claims have been put in for that year. You don't know how much of the limit's been exhausted. You also don't know how many members are part of the group. Is it 20 members part of the policy, or is it 200 members part of the policy? We, as a company, we avoid group policies like the plague. I don't like them and I'm not comfortable with them, which is why we like to have individual policies for each of the mediators, which means it's their limit, no one else can use it, and it's entirely there for them.
No, that makes sense. And also that way you're able to add other risks and cover your full business if mediation's part of your practice.
We have quite a few mediators that do other activities as well. We've got counsellors, we've got your lawyers and your solicitors. So we can always fiddle and tweak the policy. We have a set pricing for our mediators, but if you need cover for other activities, we can always look at adding that on for you. That's not an issue at all.
And that's really important. We're lucky in our industry, it's not an exorbitant price, but the risk can be millions.
It's hard to pay for something that's not tangible. You know what I mean? It's not a physical object that you're purchasing. It's an intangible object, and you always have the aspect of it's never going to happen to me. In my 18 years of insurance, I've seen multiple clients go, oh, it's never going to happen to me, and then lo and behold, 3 years down the track it happens, and they go, oh wow, I never thought this was going to happen.
Absolutely. And look, some of the examples you've given, even though people have done the wrong thing, probably their intention was no doubt good. I'm sure the person who kept them there all night was thinking, I'm doing the right thing by getting this sorted for them, even though they clearly weren't. So other kind of risks or things that we need to think about?
On that, one of the claims we've come across was a breach of privacy and confidentiality. So this was a FDR mediation, but they actually had it as a shuttle mediation because there was some DV concerns between the parties. And during the mediation, the mediators, by the slip of the tongue, has accidentally given out the location of where the wife worked. Didn't pick it up during the mediation. It was a slip of the tongue. Didn't even realise that they've done it. And after the mediation, in a couple of weeks' time, the husband has turned up at the place of work and actually assaulted and attacked the wife. And as a result, they were sued for giving out the location of where she works because there were the safety concerns there. And that's the thing, it's not as though you've voluntarily done it. It's a slip of the tongue. You didn't even realise you'd done it at the time. And it was only the fact that when the husband was being interviewed by the police and they've gone, how did you know where she works? And he goes, oh, the mediator told me. In that circumstance, the insurer's gone in to defend the reputation of the mediator, but also pay out the settlement of that one.
Because they definitely breached their obligations, even though it was inadvertent. I suppose that's the thing. It's not that you're deliberately causing the problem.
No, it was a complete accident and there was no intent or malice behind it. It was a slip of the tongue, absolute slip of the tongue.
Absolutely. And I think you've got another example of loose lips sink ships.
I do. There was a defamation case brought against a mediator. So the mediator was doing a mediation between a husband and wife. And during the mediation, the wife has mentioned that the husband has quite a small member. And after the mediation, the mediator's gone home and had a joke with his wife and this is what was said during the mediation. How funny is that? And a couple of weeks later, the mediator's wife was at a work function and actually bumped into the husband in question. And in front of a group of people at this event, she's gone, oh, you're such and such with the small member.
Oh, goodness.
And the husband has actually sued the mediator as well as the wife because it was the wife that disclosed it at the event, but it was the mediator who passed on the information. And one of the good things about the professional policies is they include spousal cover. Okay. In that circumstance, the insurer went in to defend or to fight for both the mediator and the mediator's wife. So without that spousal cover, the insurance would only cover the mediator and then they'd have to be flipping the cost of the bill for the wife. So it was a really good outcome. There was a settlement in that one. I think it was probably, off my head, I think it was about 200,000 settlement plus the defence costs on top of that.
Yes. So the moral to the story is don't
talk about your mediations.
Don't talk about your mediations. You need to talk about your mediations in supervision. You might talk in a very general way.
We've had the discussion where some of the mediators will speak to other mediators to make sure that they've done the right thing, or to recap, or to improve their experience and get that help and that support and that feedback. And that's perfectly fine. By all means, do that. You need to have that connection with other mediators and have that, be able to bounce the ideas off, but be careful with how you're doing it. For example, if you've got a client who's in banking, say they're in construction, change up the occupation and the details so that you're not giving out any particulars about your client.
Yeah, so nothing that would be identifiable, and particularly if you're working with someone who's high profile, who might be easily identified. Yeah, famous. Yeah, absolutely. Or a politician. Everyone has issues.
So your famous politician is now a tradie. Let's just go with that.
Exactly. That's really good advice. And because those things aren't relevant to what you're doing, it just doesn't matter. That part isn't the bit that you need to be getting the professional support
advice on. That's the least of the worries. You need to be working with the context of the mediation and not identifying the people.
Perfect. That's really good advice as well. I think you've given us a really good range of types of issues, and the mediators listening will think, oh, those are our ethical obligations. Yes. That's right.
The other thing to consider too is false advertising. You need to be careful with how much experience you have and what your qualifications are. And if you're embellishing, you could have clients that are picking you as their mediator based on the embellished information. There was a claim in the US where a mediator had signs up, like the big billboards, saying that he'd had 20 years experience in mediation and he had all these qualifications, and turns out he didn't. And he had clients pick him to be their mediator based on the billboards that they'd seen and weren't happy with their outcomes, and they eventually did sue him for false advertising.
That's a great reminder to people in this world of social media and other things.
And that's the thing, like quite often you want to embellish it a little bit too, especially if you're just starting out, because you don't want your clients to think that you've had no experience, you've had no mediation clients, especially with your first client. You don't want them to think that they're in deep water because you don't have the experience they anticipate you to have.
Absolutely. You can say that you've got an experience in an industry, but be very clear that it's not as a mediator. It might be someone who's got a huge amount of experience in the building industry, and now they've just become a mediator
to handle construction and building claims. You know what I mean? They've got all the experience in the building. That's what they should be focusing on with their clients.
Absolutely, but don't blur the edges and just give that implication that you've been mediating in building claims for 20 years.
Exactly.
So everyone, have a look at your Hear About Us pages and just be clear. And look, ultimately, clients tend to base it on how they feel with the person, and don't always put as much. Some do, but not everyone puts stock in 20 years experience, because it doesn't necessarily mean that someone fresh and current.
Exactly.
That's another really good example. Are there any other areas that we need to?
That's pretty much it. The main thing is focusing on that deed of agreement with your clients. It needs to be detailed. It can't just be one or two lines and this is what it is. The best way to work it is like a checklist. The more detail you have in there, and you're checking off, we'll discuss this, we'll tick that, the better.
Absolutely.
And the main three things you need in there is that it's voluntary, that there's no advice, and your conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest and your confidentiality obligations. It's not just saying these things, you need to do them. So let them know what to expect and then deliver that. Exactly. That's great advice. For anyone who wants to contact you, get a quote for professional indemnity insurance, or I guess even ask some hypotheticals.
I'm only a phone call away. If you've got concerns, if you've got questions, give me a call. I'm happy to have that conversation with you.
Yes.
Not an issue at all.
And with regards to covering additional risks, if people get a quote, they don't want to include that part, what happens then?
We can do that. So quite often, two occupations, mediation and, say, for example, coaching, we can provide them with the quote to include both. If they don't want to go ahead with that, that's not an issue. Generally, we would exclude the other occupations of the coaching in that example, just for the insurer's peace of mind to know that they're not covering those types of claims. And we can put it back to the mediation price.
That's wonderful. Look, thank you so much for making this time available.
Thank you for having me.
It's great. Always great to chat.